Welcome to Life Stories. Imagine working for years in a place where you give everything your time, your energy, your soul. And one morning, you're told it's all been for nothing. Your future, erased in a moment, and no one even bothers to look up from their desks when you walk out. But what if that moment of loss, the one that feels like the end, is really just the beginning of something bigger? What if, buried deep inside the pain, there's a spark that can still light your way forward? Today's story is about one woman's journey from the cold, faceless corporate world to rediscovering the dream she almost lost. It's a story of finding purpose after everything falls apart and the people who help us see ourselves when we can't. Stay with us as we unfold the incredible twist that will change everything. You won't want to miss this. The rain pelted against the tall glass windows of Skyline Systems, Inc., its rhythm a quiet drumbeat in the otherwise still office. Emma Carter sat at her desk, staring at the steady stream of water trickling down the panes. The world outside seemed so distant, a blur of darkened streets and flickering streetlights. Inside, the sterile buzz of the fluorescent lights and the hum of distant conversation only made her feel more isolated, as though she were trapped in a glass box, removed from everything real. For the past few years, Emma had told herself that she was content. She had a stable job, a decent paycheck, and a life that didn't require too many questions. She had learned to bury the rest, the small, bright flicker of something she once wanted to be. She used to dream of creating, of painting her emotions onto a canvas the way the great artists of history had done, but those dreams felt like distant memories now. Her father had been right. Art didn't feed the stomach. And so she had buried it, just like she buried the little sketches she used to draw on napkins, the sketches of things she could never afford to buy but longed to touch. She had put all of that away when she joined Skyline, believing that work, the grind, would fill the empty space in her heart. But it hadn't. It never had. The email pinged at exactly 10 a.m., mandatory all-hands meeting, conference room 5, effective immediately. Emma hesitated for a moment, the familiar feeling of dread creeping up her spine. She reached for her notepad, an old habit, but didn't really need it. This wasn't about notes or numbers. It was something else, something in the air that everyone had been sensing for weeks. A new wave of layoffs was coming. She knew it. Everyone knew it. As she walked toward the meeting room, the faces of her colleagues were eerily blank, their eyes focused on the ground. No one spoke. No one dared to look at each other. There was no small talk, no clattering of keyboards or idle chatter, just silence. She entered the room, her stomach sinking lower with every step. The room was packed with people, but there was a coldness that seemed to seep into the walls. They all sat stiffly in their chairs, eyes cast down, like children who knew they were about to be reprimanded. Darren Miller, the vice president of operations, walked in with two HR reps behind him. His sharp suit and even sharper smile sent a chill down Emma's spine. He was the kind of man who could cut through a person with just a glance, someone who believed power was the only thing that mattered in this world. He had always looked at her like she was a cog in a machine, a necessary but insignificant piece. "Thank you for being here," Darren began, his voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "As part of our ongoing restructuring efforts, we've had to make some difficult decisions regarding departmental efficiencies." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like poison. Then his eyes locked onto hers. "Emma Carter," he said, his voice slowing, drawing out the words. "After a thorough performance review, it has been determined that your role is no longer aligned with the goals of this company. Effective immediately, your position has been terminated." The words landed like bricks in her chest. The world seemed to pause for a moment. Her heartbeat felt deafening in her ears, drowning out the soft murmurs around her. The room was silent, utterly silent. No one looked at her. Not Susan from accounting, who used to smile at her during coffee breaks. Not Jared, who she had once helped land a promotion. Not even Linda, who sat beside her every day for 3 years, borrowing her mug. They all stared at the floor, pretending she wasn't there, pretending they didn't know the devastation their silence caused. "Please collect your belongings," Darren continued, moving on to the next slide in his presentation, as though he were discussing printer maintenance, not the brutal destruction of a person's dignity. Emma stood, her legs trembling beneath her. Each step toward the exit felt like walking through quicksand. Her hands shook as she reached for the cardboard box that awaited her on her desk. It was already half packed. Her mug, the little plant she had nurtured for years, the framed photo of her mother, and at the very bottom, buried beneath the debris of her life, was her sketch pad, the one thing she had never let anyone see, the one thing that still carried the last remnants of who she was. She walked out of the office in a daze. She didn't know where she was going. Home, maybe, or somewhere she could disappear. The weight of the box in her hands felt like the weight of her entire existence. And then, at the end of the hall, she saw him. Raymond Wells, the janitor. Always polite, always invisible. He was standing by his mop cart, watching her with quiet eyes. No pity, no judgment, just calm. He had always been there, a quiet constant in the background of her office life, someone she had never really noticed until now. He walked toward her, slow and deliberate. His hand reached into his pocket, and when he pulled it out, he held something small and golden in his palm. It was a key, rusted at the edges, worn with age, like it had been waiting for this moment. "It's time," he whispered. Emma blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Time for what?" she asked, her voice trembling. Raymond smiled softly, a smile full of wisdom and sadness. "To breathe, Emma, to finally breathe." In that moment, something inside her stirred like a tiny spark in the darkness. She took the key from his hand, feeling the warmth of it against her skin. She didn't understand, not fully, but somehow she knew this moment was important. This key was important. Do you think it's ever too late to start over and follow your true passions? What would you do if you were in Emma's shoes, given the opportunity to reclaim your lost dreams? The key was just the beginning. What awaited Emma in the next chapter of her life was still unknown, but one thing was certain. She was about to step into a new world, one where she might just find the courage to breathe again. Would she walk through that door? And what would she discover when she did? The answers lay waiting. The only question was, would she be brave enough to find them? What lies behind the door Raymond just unlocked for Emma, and will she dare to open it? Stay tuned for the next chapter of her journey, where the past and future collide in ways she never imagined. Emma's hands trembled as she sat in the car, the key heavy in her palm, its cool metal pressing against her skin. The streets outside were empty, the city just beginning to wake up. It had rained all night, the sky still shrouded in thick gray clouds. She glanced at the address Raymond had given her, 24 Pinecrest Road, her heart racing with uncertainty. The silence in the car was deafening. She had always been someone who avoided the unknown, someone who held on to the familiar, even when it made her suffocate. But now, with the weight of the key in her hand, the weight of her termination still raw in her chest, she felt an urge to go somewhere, anywhere that wasn't here. Pinecrest Road was far from the polished corporate world she had left behind. The houses were modest, the lawns unkempt, and the air smelled faintly of damp earth and old wood. It felt like a forgotten place, one that had slipped through time. She drove past crooked mailboxes, sagging porches, and overgrown gardens until she reached the end of the street. There it was. The small detached building behind the house tucked away in the corner of the yard. It looked like something from a different era. Its blue siding faded, the roof slanted with age. There was a warmth to it, though, something that made her feel a strange sense of belonging. She stepped out of the car, key still in her hand, and made her way to the door. Her footsteps were heavy against the gravel path, each one filled with the same hesitation that had plagued her since that morning. When she reached the door, she hesitated. Why had Raymond given her this key? What was she really walking into? Was this some kind of test, some lesson she was supposed to learn? She didn't know, and yet something pulled her forward. The lock was stiff, but with a little pressure, the door creaked open. The air inside smelled of old paint and cedar, like time itself had stood still in this place. She stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath her feet. It was a small room, maybe the size of a classroom, but it felt bigger somehow, filled with the ghosts of forgotten dreams and half-finished thoughts. The shelves were cluttered with old sketchbooks, jars of dried brushes, and tubes of paint. There was a canvas covered by a sheet in the center of the room, but Emma didn't approach it right away. Instead, her fingers brushed the edge of a desk, lingering on the cracked ceramic mug sitting next to a pile of pencils. This room, this studio, belonged to someone who had lived here before her. She couldn't help but imagine Lorraine, the woman Raymond had spoken of so often. She could almost see her there, hunched over a canvas, her hands stained with the colors of her dreams. Lorraine had painted because she had to, because the world outside had tried to silence her, and in this small room, she had found a place to be loud. Emma's throat tightened as she thought about her own life, about the years she had spent in a world that had never asked her to dream. All those years, she had worked to please everyone except herself. She had buried her art, buried the very thing that had once made her feel alive because it hadn't fit into the life she had been told to live. But now, as she stood in Lorraine's studio, she could feel it, feel the pulse of creation that had been locked away for so long. She approached the canvas, the sheet hanging over it like a veil. She hesitated, her breath catching in her throat. She had no idea what she would find beneath it. What if it was something she couldn't live up to? What if Lorraine's legacy was too much for her to bear? With a trembling hand, Emma reached for the sheet and pulled it away. The canvas was empty. For a moment, Emma stood there, staring at the blank space in disbelief. This couldn't be right. There had to be something more. But the longer she looked at it, the more she realized this was it. This was the place where it all began. There were no expectations here. No deadlines, no corporate goals, just a blank canvas, waiting to be filled with her own colors, her own story. But it was terrifying. The fear gripped her heart, and for a moment, she thought about turning back. She could leave, could walk away, could find another job, another life. It would be easier. But as the silence stretched on, she realized that this was what she had been searching for all along. She had spent so many years trying to please other people, trying to fit herself into molds that didn't suit her. But now, in this room, she could be herself. She didn't need to be anyone else. She didn't need to meet anyone's expectations. Emma took a step forward, her hand reaching for the charcoal pencils on the desk. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't stop. She picked one up and held it like she had done so many years ago, in her childhood room, when the world was still full of possibility. She closed her eyes for a moment, and then without thinking, she drew a line. It was jagged, imperfect, but it was hers. The fear didn't go away. It lingered in the back of her mind, but for the first time, she didn't care. She let it sit there, let it be a part of the process. She wasn't trying to make it perfect anymore. She was just trying to make it real. As the hours passed, the studio filled with the sound of her sketching. The world outside faded away, and all that mattered was the page in front of her, the charcoal in her hand, and the room that had become her sanctuary. And then, the door opened. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She turned, startled, and saw Raymond standing in the doorway, his weathered smile still kind, still steady. "You're doing it," he said softly. For the first time in years, Emma felt seen. "What do you think it means to truly follow your passion, even when fear holds you back? Can Emma really embrace this new life, or will the weight of her past pull her down?" As Raymond left her to her work, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The journey she had started wasn't just about art. It was about rediscovering herself. But was she ready for the challenges that would come with it? And what would happen when the world started noticing her work? What happens next in Emma's journey? Will she be able to build the life she's dreamed of, or will the past continue to haunt her? Stay tuned for the next chapter in this emotional tale of self-discovery and transformation. Emma woke up early that morning, as she had been for the past few weeks. The soft light of dawn filtered through the tall windows of Lorraine's studio, casting long shadows across the floor. She hadn't slept much. Her mind was still racing with ideas, with projects that needed finishing, with the constant buzz of emails and messages from clients who were beginning to take notice of her work. But it was more than that. It was the feeling that she was finally alive again. For so long, she had existed in a fog, lost in the haze of corporate life, surrounded by people who only saw her as a number, as someone to shuffle around like a cog in the machine. But here, in this studio, she was something more. She was an artist, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was pretending to be someone else. The walls of the studio had become her refuge. It was a place where she could escape the pressures of the world outside, where she could lose herself in the flow of colors and shapes. She no longer counted the days or worried about deadlines. She painted, she drew, and for the first time, she felt like she was creating something that mattered. Not to the world at large, necessarily, but to herself. Her latest piece, a portrait of a woman caught in a moment of quiet joy, was nearly finished. It had started as just a sketch, just a fleeting image in her mind, but as she had worked on it, it had become something more. It had become a story of resilience, of finding peace after years of turmoil, of learning to breathe again. But as she stood back to examine it, a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. It wasn't the piece itself. No, the piece was beautiful. But it was the feeling that lingered at the edges of her consciousness. The same feeling that had been with her ever since she had walked away from Nova Access. The same feeling that told her that no matter how far she ran, the past would always follow her. Her phone buzzed on the desk beside her, dragging her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Angela, the niece of Raymond, the woman who had bought her first piece of art. Angela had been her first true client, and now the message was simple but powerful. Emma, the gallery wants to feature your work in their upcoming show. They're asking for more pieces. This is your big break. Emma stared at the message, her hands shaking slightly. This was what she had wanted, wasn't it? This was the moment she had been waiting for. But as the words settled into her mind, she felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. Was she really ready for this? Was she ready to step into the light, to be seen for who she truly was? Her thoughts turned to Raymond, to the man who had given her the key to this new life. He had always believed in her, even when she couldn't believe in herself. He had seen the artist within her long before she ever could. And now it felt like she was standing on the edge of something big, something important. But there was also a voice in the back of her mind, the same voice that had always been there, the voice that reminded her of the world she had left behind. The corporate world. The people who didn't know what it meant to truly live. The voice of her father, telling her that art was a foolish dream, something to be discarded for the sake of practicality. Emma stood there for a long time, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. And then, almost as if it had been waiting for her to notice, something inside her shifted. She walked to the corner of the room and opened the drawer where her sketch pad had been hiding. It had been buried beneath stacks of papers, beneath the weight of the past. But now, she pulled it out, dusting off the cover. For a moment, she just held it in her hands, feeling the familiar weight of it, the comfort of the lines and shapes that had once brought her joy. She had come so far, but she knew there was still more to do. She wasn't just painting to make a living anymore. She was painting to survive, to reclaim who she had been before the world had tried to drown her dreams. The phone buzzed again. Angela had sent another message, a simple question. Are you coming? Emma took a deep breath. She didn't need to reply right away, but she knew, deep down, that this was it. This was her moment. She wasn't going to let fear or doubt stand in her way anymore. With one final look at the portrait she had been working on, she picked up her phone and typed a response. I'm coming. Hours later, Emma stood in front of the small art gallery, her heart racing. The door was open, the soft hum of conversation drifting out into the street. She felt like an intruder, someone who didn't belong. But then she saw it, the sign on the door, local artists featured, opening night. And there, in the window, was her portrait, the one she had painted with so much fear, so much doubt. But now it looked different. It looked alive. And as she stepped inside, she realized that this was what she had been waiting for. Not the approval of others, but the quiet recognition of her own worth. Raymond's voice echoed in her mind, his words from the day he had given her the key. You are an artist, even if the world tries to convince you otherwise. She was an artist, and the world would finally see it. But as the night wore on and Emma spoke with patrons and fellow artists, something began to shift again. There, in the corner of the gallery, she saw a familiar face, Darren Miller, the man who had fired her, standing with a glass of wine in his hand, chatting with the gallery owner. For a moment, Emma froze. The anger that had simmered inside her for so long, the bitterness from her years in the corporate world, rushed to the surface. She wanted to walk up to him, to tell him everything that she had become, everything he had tried to crush. But then, as she looked at the people around her, the strangers who had come to admire her work, she realized something. She didn't need to prove anything to Darren. He was just another part of the past, another shadow in the life she had walked away from. With a smile, Emma turned away from him and walked to the center of the gallery, where her work was being admired. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer afraid. What does it mean to finally stand in the light after years of hiding in the shadows? Can Emma truly leave her past behind and embrace the future ahead? What was your reaction to the twist in Emma's journey? Do you think she's finally found her peace, or is there more yet to come? If you enjoyed Emma's story, drop a 100 in the comments to show your support. Where are you watching from? Let us know your country in the comments. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who could use a little inspiration today. Thank you for watching Life Stories.